Well, hello there. My name is Sam Williams, and I'm standing in for Rene this week. He's otherwise occupied, got some family commitments. Today, in our digital dialogues, we're going to be talking a little bit about workspaces and adapting to the new normal of workspace management across a range of different facilities. And I've got a panel here with me. So we've got Martin van der Zayden, hopefully who you can see on screen now. Good afternoon, Martin. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
So Martin is a solutioneer from Graysale Matter. And we've also got Mark Williams from Trixie. He's a partner there. And Trixie do a lot of work around workspace and facilities management using IBM solutions. Hi, Mike. You're muted.
Sorry. Hi, Sam. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
And lastly, I've got Paul North with us from Asset Future.
How are you doing?
Thanks for being with us. So I guess we're all adjusting to this new normal, which is a socially distanced world. And today we're going to discuss this from both a short-term and a medium-term to long-term standpoint of how we're adapting to changing the use of space. So to get us started, Martin van der Zayden is going to talk a little bit about facilities management and workspace management. So Martin, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon. Look, thinking about facilities, and it's a great, it's a bit humbling to be amongst this panel of people who are facilities experts. I'm more of a heavy asset sort of person, but a frequent user of facilities, and I really like the definitions of facility management, but there's a couple that really resonated with me. One of them's from Wikipedia, favorite go-to research, and it talks about a professional management discipline focused on efficient and effective delivery of support service for the organizations that the facility serves. So it's quite clear. It is a professional discipline, and it is around efficiency and effectiveness. The ISO, normally a much more formal description, actually goes a bit further and incorporates spaces as being responsible for delivering services to people. People and productivity are the core of business, and I think that's a much more modern take on what facilities management is. When we focus on effectiveness and efficiency, which is a pretty typical asset management approach to take, we do tend to sometimes lose sight of the people and service aspect. And facilities and spaces have many stakeholders, and the stakeholders have a huge range of needs: comfort, security, safety, also return on investment, utilization, productivity, fitness for purpose. So meeting all of those needs is an extremely challenging professional discipline in itself. Over the years, technology's driven us to mandate process and to improve the data we hold. So to understand where assets are and where facilities, how they're performing, how they're being used, what are the costs that are being plowed into them, and is it value for money? But also importantly, it's about looking forward. And I think we've spent the last decade really collecting information and embedding process and mandating process about how to process people's needs, planned needs, reactive needs. So what's happening now, and what seems to be the new normal, is that we don't have a nice steady state environment. We've been driven by disruption. It seems to be the new normal, and what that's doing to us is compressing our planning timeframes and causing us to use, in this case, spaces in a completely different way, with almost no warning. So, how do we take our nice tidy asset database, facilities database, and a nice tidy information stack, and a nice tidy processes, and then suddenly apply that to taking a general purpose space and turning it into a special purpose space, or completely changing the nature of how we use it, or who uses it, or what they use a space for. So we've had, earthquakes, pandemics, global financial crises. We're getting it all. So the new normal is disruption. So our systems, our solutions need to move from where they currently are. Where they need to be now is helping us to support planning for much shorter timeframes, for much larger swings in utilization. And I think that's what I'm really excited about today's presentations, is that we're going to talk about some of those examples. I mean, I'm even thinking back to recent New Zealand history around the earthquakes. And suddenly a lot of our customers were faced with decisions about how to take maybe 10 years of what would normally have been planned work and compress it into getting back up and running within months, weeks and months. Sadly, I think we see that systems fall by the wayside there, and we end up resorting back to mobile forms or paper forms, paper work orders, and then creating a mountain of activity for ourselves to post-process to try and get the asset management systems or facilities management systems back to where they should be, after the chaotic events have taken place. So today, I think we're going to see other examples of how that's starting to impact and how solutions are adapting to cater for that. Thank you, Sam.
Great. Thanks, Martin. That was a fascinating introduction to the subject matter. I guess in talking about the Christchurch earthquake there, we were using a hospital as a potential example. And that's something that's quite interesting in terms of all of us and what we've experienced in relation to COVID. And Mark has an example of what Trixie have been doing with the Royal Melbourne Hospital in their very rapid adaptation to how the space is actually utilised within that specialist environment, which is a hospital. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Sam. I agree. That was fascinating and insightful intro from Martin. Perhaps I could indulge and steer things slightly sideways and share some lessons that we've learned recently, and some, I think, probably pretty practical solutions that'll help us prepare to get us through this post-current COVID workplace, the new normal, or whatever the flavour you'd like to call it for the next little while. So Melbourne Health is an example that I'd like to use, if you let me ramble about it a little bit here. I really do believe that there are lessons for corporates from what the health sector has done recently. So let me see if I can share some of that. Melbourne Health used Tririga to manage safer spaces during COVID, and still are, and Tririga helped them prepare for it. They've been using Tririga to manage their role as a focal point for Victoria's COVID-19 response. It's the oldest hospital in Victoria, the largest, et cetera, but it was also a focal point for COVID-19, so it's particular focus there. Look, they were pretty well accustomed to performing deep cleans on demand. It's pretty much business as usual on that front. They did, though, transform their spaces to suit more COVID-19 dedicated services. So they reconfigured their spaces and their staffing plans and their asset management and maintenance regimes to suit what they were expecting to happen with COVID. With hindsight, perhaps they were a little over prepared, but way better to do that and to flex down as needed than be underprepared. So the other interesting thing about it, it's just normal for a hospital. They work in shifts. They separate people by shifts. They manage their entire response digitally with Tririga. It's all auditable and traceable. So when medical assets have been serviced. When cleaning has been done. With all the checklists and checkboxes, with a full traceability there. So I think corporate real estate will really. They're not hospitals, but they'll need to perform almost like hospitals and learn some lessons from that. Transform spaces to less density and less traffic. More focused on face-to-face time at the right density. Separate working shifts. A lot of our clients, and I've read around the place that people are thinking about breaking up their workforce to work in shifts. Perhaps activity-based working patterns rather than, just everyone being there 9 to 5. Much more rigorous cleaning regimes, some new cleaning technology like electrostatic, and there's a whole raft of new cleaning technology and processes. Cleaners will probably need to be certified as they are in hospital environments. So that's kind of some of the lessons, that I thought may be relevant from a healthcare perspective that corporate real estate might need to learn from. Sam, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I guess I was fascinated to see the Army engineers being deployed in the States to turn hostels into negative pressure spaces and change an existing use into something that was similar to before, but changing the ventilation configuration there. Mm-hmm. Have you seen anything like that in terms of Australia, having to adapt hotels or?
Look, not specifically that actual case, but certainly clients are rejigging their HVAC maintenance regimes to introduce higher spec HEPA filters and that sort of thing to cater for that. So.
All right, great. Well, Paul, maybe you want to offer up your perspective on things here from a short-term perspective and an adaptation standpoint.
Yeah, look, we're seeing really a mind shift in the long-term usage of these facilities that have been accelerated in a very short time frame. As you can see in the picture there, now that we're getting back into these facilities, the standard way of socially distancing is actually creating larger strains on space because you're not able to compact people into the same sort of area that you were traditionally able to do. You're even seeing that in infrastructure, actually, as well as buildings. You're getting cycle lanes being created out of parking bays on streets so that people can have more freedom to walk, to distance themselves, to space out, to use, high energy or exercise-based travel as well. And that actually flows on through, transport networks, a lower amount of people utilizing them, and actually then a lower amount of people going into office space. So in the commercial space, a company even like ourselves that's a high-tech organization in the city center that's part of a co-working space, well, getting into that building's a lot more onerous. You have to stage how often you're going in there, how many people are in that co-working space or even a corporate office as well. And stagger the entry and exit of that so that the standard systems that are used, the elevators, etc., are not overwhelmed because you can't put as many people in those spaces. We also see things like in the education space and in the health space as well, in hospitals. as Mark alluded to earlier, we have a complete reconfiguration of some of those campuses. So if you have a set of clinics and consultation rooms, with the advent of telehealth, that requirement is now diminishing. And there's an argument to say that it will arguably never get back up to the same level that it was in terms of those physical interactions for a consultation in the health industry. Very similar to what's happening in retail, where a lot of people are using Amazon and Kogan and eBay now through digital means. The same thing's happening with a whole set of other industries, whether it's health or education. There's the realization that digital technologies can do some of the heavy lifting that it previously thought wasn't capable in the past. But now that behavioral change has happened, people are starting to shift to that paradigm. What that means fundamentally over the long term is the built assets, the built facilities that are there, they have to be fit for purpose. It's not really just about rack and pack and stack them into a building nowadays, because the leverage that you would get from just a high utilization driving more revenue, whether it's in a shopping center or a commercial space, that is now playing second fiddle at the moment to a risk-based analysis of how you use the space. So fundamentally, you're not going to drive any revenue off of your facility if you're not able to put people in it, because the risk factor is too high. So the old way of measuring whether or not a building is fit for purpose, people can use it, it's going to deliver the outcome, and the performance is actually being driven by risk at the moment rather than simply by dollars and cents, which it was previously.
Great. Yeah, it's interesting to start considering how the risk profile is really changing the old paradigms, which were largely driven by cost. And I guess this idea of the more people you can stack into a space, the more efficient it is. I guess from a sustainability standpoint, stacking them in is not quite that efficient if they end up in hospital or you have a public health emergency. So, the risk profile's definitely changing. So just before I go to Mark, I just want to say to the audience that's out there, if you've got any questions, the Q&A is there. Please feel free to ask any questions you've got for the panelists, and we will take those and put them to them as they come in. So Mark, thinking about this idea of the changing profile between risk, cost, and performance, what are you seeing from a persona standpoint in relation to how the various personas that manage spaces are having to adapt and change what they do and how spaces are configured?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And it does depend a little bit on your point of view. So let me declare right up front, I see no crystal clear image of what the working arrangements will be in a couple of years. I've been listening and reading, though, listening to our clients and colleagues. It is clear to me, and I think to all, that workspaces won't be the same as before. For me, it kind of distills down to us workers. Employees need to feel really safe. They need to feel valued and have a degree of flexibility in their working patterns. They need to feel their workspaces are collaborative and productive, as well as really safely managed. So, from employees has changed. Employers, I think, need to adjust quickly and sometimes with competing objectives. I'll try and expand on that in a sec. So now I think is the time that businesses really need to invest in technology. Spreadsheets aren't going to cut it for this. It's great, awesome if you've got a really good integrated workplace management system already. You're set up to take on this challenge. The auditability, I mentioned it before, the auditability and the traceability of facilities management transactions is even more important now, through audit, to know what cleaning's been done, to know how you've reconfigured space, and to monitor it as it's going along as well. I recently read some interesting observations. Well, it was a PwC CFO survey on the stuff that we're talking about today. And it does contrast in parts from what was important before, pre-COVID. Before it was really a balance between cost and employee experience. CFOs of most sorts of organizations know that space, real estate, is the second largest number on their balance sheet after wages. Slightly different for asset intensive industries, but for most organizations, second biggest number on this. So, small efficiencies in your space utilization translate into really big savings. The CFOs did have some compliance responsibilities, IFRS 16, lease accounting, financial reporting, all that sort of stuff. HR managers and the heads of employee experience, which we're seeing more and more people appointed to those sorts of positions at the moment, they were really fighting to attract and retain the best people. The battle to retain smart millennials is real. It remains now and through and after COVID. Employees wanted easy access to digital workplace services to make their day a bit easier and a bit more productive, through mobile functionality, through sensors, through, in-building guidance and wayfinding, through a concierge service, just convenience, really. Things have changed a bit though now. Now the workforce will be much more intense, I think, for shorter periods, likely, focus on quality rather than just quantity time. CFOs, I think, and I totally agree with Paul's observations about the risk profile, but I think CFOs will still see opportunities and find opportunities to rationalise space as people prove they can be productive remotely. So on the one hand, I think we'll need more space per person, but not as many people will be at the workplace at the one time. Now, I suppose the other thoughts on that is that, the maintenance of workplaces has shifted a little bit now in terms of importance. I won't say it's as important as the maintenance of aircraft and hospitals and that sort of thing, but it really, it's way more important than it was before. So, employees and governments will expect employers to provide safe workplaces. Facilities managers will be even more important than ever. So yeah, sorry, starting to ramble. That's some of my thoughts on that high level stuff. Sam?
No, it's not really a ramble. It's interesting to sort of think about this from the point of view of different points of view around it and the different expectations that there are of your users. I guess it'll be interesting to see when Tri-Riga introduces the TikTok workspace management module into things. I
don't know what TikTok is.
Well, something for everyone here, for every generation. So yeah, end of this we'll have to do a TikTok. So Paul, thinking now from a longer term perspective. So as we go into the medium term and shift, now that we've adapted to the new normal, now we have to start planning for the new normal, given that there are also a lot of uncertainties and variables, but it's probably fair to say that things are not going to be the same for quite some time to come, and we're going to need to build in some of these social distancing principles and other adaptive principles into our planning cycles. So maybe this is a good time to talk about those sorts of things and what you're seeing.
Yes, so the most fundamental change that has happened in the last 3 months is there's been almost like a utilization shock to a lot of assets, whether or not they're built, whether or not they're heavy assets or whatever. When we've gone through shutdowns like we have, whether or not it's up in China, a very severe lockdown like you've had in New Zealand, and something very similar here in Australia, although we didn't go into complete lockdown like you did. You get a point where these facilities are not being used at all. So they've gone from sometimes 120% utilization or more in large cities to virtually zero. So that actually affects the long-term degradation of those assets. It affects the maintenance regimes. If we look across different sectors in education, whilst the schools were all working from home, we still had a little bit of utilization for essential workers. So there hasn't been a complete shutdown. We saw in the education sector ourselves here that essential workers were school maintainers, and therefore that work carried on almost as if nothing had happened. Whereas in other sectors like the airline industry, there was just a skeleton crew keeping the planes checked over, but not in an operational capacity because none of them were actually flying. So if you have a look at things like cost over 10 years, or if you have a look at degradation and when things are going to be end of life, as we can see here, that's fundamentally now going to change because you've had a massive shift in the utilization of your assets. So when you have a portfolio that has, tens or hundreds of buildings in some cases for some organizations, that change in utilization is going to have a dramatic effect on how you fund that portfolio. So we'll see differences in, how CFOs determine they need to maintain based upon the utilization. And we also talked about risk. If in the past the risk of a building was just simply the compliance aspect, whether or not we're doing risk-based analysis around the essential services of a building, whether or not that's the fire services, or if it's facilities for disability access, etc. We're now going a step further to make sure that spaces are managed appropriately. So the one I always like to look at is hospitals used to have a risk profile around their around operating theaters, because if the facility isn't managed to the highest spec and standards, people can die. Well, nowadays the operating theaters are still just as critical, but also now are the entrances and exits. So you start to see things like a risk profile being applied to a building on the entry, because people might be coming in that have viruses that cause an event within that facility. So we get focuses on things like thermal imaging, who's coming in, temperature checks and things like that didn't exist before. So a risk-based profile across a building, that's fundamentally shifting as well, and not just for things like space and social distancing. Then we have things like the condition of the building. So I spoke previously about how you would make sure that the condition of a building, you get the biggest bang for your buck for your budget. But now a lot of the thought processes are around the risk aspect. So condition actually ties in with risk, ties in with budget, and all three of them are those immovable kind of variables that you need to balance as the strategy around those built assets change. And being able to see all of those different assets from a cost, risk, and performance aspect in a single view, and being able to change those variables is now more important than ever as we go into a strategic view around our facilities that we've never had in the past.
Great. So any specific examples that have recently cropped up around that?
Yeah, I mean, we, as I mentioned in the health space, we're getting a lot of dynamics around risk around entrances, whereas in other industries like retail, there isn't really risk around traffic. They want traffic to come through, but it's more around the amount of traffic. Also, we have a lot of organizations that fundamentally just don't have the dollars that they had to spend before. So they have to be able to do a risk-based analysis on what they absolutely must fund in order to keep the building able to be operationally sound. So the dimensions that we're seeing in hospitals, its entries and exits and throughput, as well as the critical spaces, but also the space utilization in hospitals is changing. I've mentioned telehealth. You're not going to need as many consultations rooms in the future as you've needed today. So there's a fundamental shift in our relationship with buildings and how we interact with them that I think will swing the pendulum a certain way, and it will come back and correct, but we'll never get back to the level that we had before COVID hit. And it's just going to be a really interesting view on how that then filters through to the funding model for these facilities and how that affects the industry in terms of how they're managed. And that's the facilities management paradigm, right?
Yeah. Mark, bringing you in on this discussion now, I guess I was fascinated to hear, and I think I'm certainly seeing this in the industry that I'm in, that you're seeing budgets slashed, so everybody is being asked to do different things with a lot less resource. And you were mentioning that you're hearing that quite a bit at the moment, that you're having to figure out how to reactivate spaces on a shoestring. Maybe you want to take us through some examples of how people are actually adapting to this and kind of a practical guide.
Yeah, sure. So there are the good news is I think there are existing technology solutions that will really help through this transition period and ongoing management. So let me see if I can kind of drill down into some solutions that are available that'll help. So the slide that's up at the moment, this is kind of a point of view on what we need to do to prepare for workplaces opening up again, the day-to-day running of the new normal, and then on demand management of things as well. So, and this is from a persona of a field technician, of a mobile service user. And I'll just kind of highlight some of the key activities that they'll be doing. So we need to make sure that that the ventilation, that the HVAC systems are not just well maintained, but they're operating at the very highest level that specifications that they can. So installing high efficiency, low size HEPA filters, the cooling towers, all of that sort of thing on the servicing. A really rigorous deep clean to the standards that are specified. There may be installations of new equipment that needs to happen, supplies and so forth that need to be set up for sanitary purposes. So that's kind of a one-off thing. There's also a whole other piece of planning that I'll go into in a sec in terms of reconfiguring the spaces and managing those through a project infrastructure. Once we're up and going, though, there's new scheduled asset maintenance services, daily cleaning, disinfection tasks, deep cleaning. For example, after meeting rooms are used, they'll go through a cleaning cycle. And they didn't necessarily before, so these things are all new, and capturing those data, that data. So this is relevant whether you're own and operate your own spaces or whether you outsource it to others. So this the next slide. So that's kind of a view of the work task management stuff, and the good news there is that Tririga or Maximo will do it. Manage those operational aspects. The next bit I'd kind of like to focus on in terms of solutions is how to reconfigure spaces. So Tririga provides a capability to manage space utilization. You can do it through clicking on a CAD drawing or through a BIM drawing. So this is an example. So you can locate a space, and you can look at the allocation of spaces if you need to. If you think about it, one thing I like to think about is, before we had workstation, without reconfiguring, the very least you can do is kind of take a checkerboard approach where you've got every second workstation and diagonally across, and that will satisfy the separation. But other clients we're talking to are saying, well, that might be okay for an interim, but we actually need to reconfigure our workspaces properly and do that as a project. Tririga projects can help you manage the reconfiguration of your facilities, and you can use stack plans. So in the example here, you can produce a whole set of scenarios and look at the potential savings and making sure that you're providing a safe workplace by looking at different stack plans. Next slide. Yeah, so here's an example of a stack plan, and it's a really simple user interface. It represents basically supply and demand, and you can drill down into each of those and see what organization, what division it's for each floor of the building, and you can reconfigure the stack plans as you need to. The neat thing about that is that it's once you're done with a stack plan and you're happy with the scenario, you can actually activate it, and it will automatically create a project for reconfiguring the space. It will create the move transactions to move assets and facilities and people around for that new space reconfiguration. So the other aspect of looking at this is the whole lease and own property portfolio. To do that, we can use the Tririga real estate module, which helps the planning up front. It helps you with space consolidation of your property portfolio, helps you with divestments if you want to consolidate and let a property go, investments if you want to change the mix. It also does all of the changes to your leases, lease management, and lease accounting. So the slide that we've got there is showing worker insights, which is really, so I've spoken about Tririga being a great way to manage the work tasks that need to actually happen, the things, but also to plan for the space reconfiguration and to manage it as a project. This is a slightly different approach. This is a piece of technology called Worker Insights that's really about monitoring the current state of play and your compliance. So it uses sensors, Bluetooth, camera, infrared sensors to make sure you're doing social distancing, your health monitoring, and identify any risk areas and risk zones that might come up in your facility, and that way you can help manage around that. I think the last slide here is, so this is an example, just the social distancing and monitoring. So you can see here a heat map showing where people are naturally congregating. Typically a facility manager would look at this and say, okay, well, we need to either provide some guidelines, some notes, or actually reconfigure the space so this sort of thing doesn't happen. So anyway, so that's just some points of view on potential technology solutions.
Great. Yes, I look forward to the day that the face mask police detect whether or not I'm wearing it, and the alarm bells go off as I enter the building. So I guess with that in mind and trying to draw this to a close a little bit, Martin, were there some points that you wanted to probably tease out from Mark and Paul's talks here that were either illuminating for you or things that you hadn't thought of before that you need to be thinking about?
Do I really have to admit that? Actually, it's a bit embarrassing because we're supposed to be here as offering thought leadership, and I've learned an incredible amount. So thanks, guys. I guess what's really struck me is that the whole disruption being the new normal has to drive an entire new behavior out of the solutions that we've spent the last 2 decades building. They are currently single sources of truth. They're great repositories of data, in some cases insights and process. What they need to become, if change, really, and disruption really is the new normal, what they need to become are drivers for the next best action, which means that they need to respond to a much more granular range of inputs. And when Mark said that everything's dynamic and we don't have a crystal ball, what that means is we're going to ask our systems to provide that crystal ball. So they need to be, we used to have a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years to plan. Now we might have days and weeks, or weeks and months. And so to get use of our solutions, we need to mine those insights and all that great data and the granularity which tells us what people are doing, how the space is being utilized, and and what it's being utilized for, and how often it's being utilized, and say, okay, well, here are the 5 best scenarios. So monitoring health, monitoring space utilization, monitoring the purposes, monitoring the success with which people, or the comfort or the security that people are using the space with, and then coming back with scenarios about how to remodel it and building the stack, automatically building the stack plan. That has to be our ambition. And so, picking up on Paul's point of reconfiguring for fitness for purpose, if the purpose keeps changing, then the configuration needs to keep changing as well. So for me, the driving outcome from this is we need to work a lot harder on not just marrying up our facilities management systems with better inputs, but also the algorithmic and artificial intelligence approach to utilizing those inputs to create better plans going forward, and then apply human intelligence to sorting through which are the best plans, and then applying other systems to executing those plans. So we've got a bit of work to do, guys.
An engineer's perspective on things. So
I'll take that as a compliment.
I guess, Mark, what would be the key takeaways or 3 pieces of advice that you give anybody that's having to think about workspace utilization going forward as part of the new normal?
Look, I don't know if I'll be as insightful as others. Has been really interesting, but I think one of my favorite options, the do nothing option, is unfortunately not a valid one right now. So everyone will need to do something. So that's number one. And the other thing, I was just today we only had a microsecond really to look at potential technology solutions. So if anyone wants to look in more depth at what's available out there, I'd love to help on that. So.
Super. And Paul, any key takeaways for people as they adjust to the new normal of socially distanced space?
Yeah, I think the one thing is that the change that has happened, the pendulum will swing back, but it won't swing back to where it was. And therefore, our planning for how we use buildings and infrastructure and how we interact with them and how we create good experiences for the users of those facilities will fundamentally change. And therefore, if we don't have the data with which to analyze how we use the space, how we maximize its safety and the performance and the experience of it, then those people that are managing those facilities will find that customers and employees will vote with their feet.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting kind of perspective when you talk about the pendulum swinging. The pendulum has swung to managing a massive public health risk. As we bring things back, I guess the consideration of the experience is also going to become an important thing, because people will vote with their feet. Or, you know, I guess that's one of the challenges that we're all experiencing at the moment. People are not going back to their workplaces. You know, they've become comfortable in their homes, as we all sit here talking from our homes.
Yeah.
So we have to encourage people to actually come back and utilize the space, which is an experience component that also balances risk and cost. So thanks, guys, for your input. It's fascinating, as I say, to hear from you. And I always, being a geographer, I think spatially, so that this is always a fascinating discussion to have. So thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
And thanks, Paul. And thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
And everyone watching, thank you for viewing.